Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis, the Praise of Folly podcast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Telegram. You can support me on Subscribestar, buy me a coffee and locals, and also don't forget to check out my Substack. Today is the third and final episode of our summary of Just Moldbug's UR 2007. Today's big idea we discuss will be Neo-Cameralism. So we'll start from the top. Audience reminder. For more articles about last week's summary, read 5 Ways to Classify Belief Systems, Universalism, Post-War Christianity as Universal Sect, Universalism and Original Sin, James Burnham's Dante's Politics as a Wish. The goal of this summary, focus on Neo-Cameralist arc of Moldbug's writing. Going back to some older articles in the second section that do this, notable essays will be omitted, such as How Dawkins Got Pwned. Readers can read those for themselves. To be honest, I think most people have already read Dawkins Got Pwned, but
for sure.
The Magic of Symmetrical Sovereignty, 5/19/2007. Limited sovereignty is responsible for the chaos in our era. Sovereignty is an independently secured primary property right. If another organization outside your direct influence, police, maintain your property, secondary property right. Worst result of symmetric sovereignty is a global dictator who tortures people, etc. Imagine Finagle, an invulnerable alien with the power to kill at will, who comes for our gold. Easiest way for Finagle to maximize gold revenue is to run a normal economy and tax it in gold. Finagle has no reason to oppose an artificial restriction on his subjects. Reason for all this is that Finagle's power is secure. Other dictators have enemies. Okay, I don't even know where to begin on this. I mean, Moldbug is so schizophrenic here. So, limited sovereignty is responsible for our chaos. That's literally the opposite. We don't have limited sovereignty, in fact. The deep state does what it wants, and there's no constitutional oversight. So, 2007, I mean, this is like the Bush War on Terror. They were already rolling out the Homeland Security and the National Security State. So they were clearly already operating outside of any legal scope. Because really what you're saying, if you think limited sovereignty is bad, is you're saying the rule of law is bad. And you're saying you don't want the rule of law. Because if you have an absolute despot, who stands over him to judge? Nobody. That's why the divine right of monarchs would say, we stand only accountable to God.
Yeah, I mean, one interpretation of this, which I got from reading his later stuff about neocameralism, is he thinks that limited sovereignty, in the sense that other countries aren't as sovereign as we are, is why the world is so chaotic. So imagine India, Nepal, Afghanistan, any other country had the power to snap its fingers and nuke us from orbit if we try to do some of the crap we've been doing those countries over the past decade. Well, we'd stop doing that, because messing with them would literally get us blown out of existence. I think that's the way he means limited sovereignty here.
Okay. Right. I mean, then the whole Finagle angle is just weird. It's just bizarre. It just goes back to your point that Moldbug just wants a libertarian society, because what does Finagle bring to in existence in the thought experiment? A libertarian society, per your first discussion on formalism. So
there's one interesting way they're at odds, which I didn't even think about until I was typing this up today, which is why it's a fun exercise to do this once in a while.
Yeah.
What do libertarians want for the economy most of all? Like, what is the primary thing you'll always see them advocating for?
More deregulation.
The gold standard.
Oh, the gold standard, yeah.
And what does Finagle come for in this society?
The gold.
The gold. So what do you think is going to happen to the economy every year when they pay taxes to Finagle and gold?
Yeah, you're running out of gold someday.
Right. So this assumption that Finagle is going to maximize his revenue by running a standard economy, but he's removing all the gold that supposedly backs a standard economy, means that the libertarians can't believe in the gold standard. Otherwise, what they'd be saying is Finagle is going to run a standard economy by removing its spine year on year, so you don't have the thing that backs a standard economy in the first place. That was just something cheeky I noticed. I was just like, wait a minute, that can't all be true. What the heck is going on?
Yeah, no, that's a good insight. I didn't catch that. But okay, so secure sovereignty is independently secured. And so it sounds like he's saying is you have to secure it yourself. If you let somebody else secure it, you're not sovereign, they are.
Exactly. If you have to appeal to the police to secure your property rights because they're the ones with the power to resolve
Yeah.
issues, they're responsible for your property. You're merely a secondary property holder.
I mean, that's technically true, but
Yep.
the conclusion that someone on the right should take from this is that we should never have outsourced all of these necessary services to unaccountable experts.
It's a good point. Yeah, and
Look,
Moldbug kind of wants to double down on that,
yeah,
doesn't
he
he?
wants to double. He wants to double down on the problem because, yeah, of course, back in the day, you had the night watch. You had people that worked together to do these things.
Yep.
Okay, yeah. So Moldbug wants more of the problem. He wants. It's like, well, that just goes to your point, right? He's infiltrating the right as a dark elf to help the Brahmins out.
Mm.
So, is there anything else you want to add on the magic of sovereignty?
No. Except to say that when Moldbug says he wants a libertarian society in his first article, he really does mean it, right? Because he makes appeals to references in this article I didn't bring up in the summary. As like, do you think finagle being after your gold is going to stop you from smoking a J? Heck no. He like stuff like that was peppered all over the article, and it's very clear,
Yeah.
like what kinds of stuff he's mad that society's not providing him.
Yep. Okay. The Finagle Grand Challenge, Good Government, or as Good Customer Service, 5/24/25, 2007. Suppose you find a ring of Finagle, but it only has power over an island region called Finagle Land. So, yeah, hey, Logos. Suppose we're living in a science fiction film. Why not? That's where Aristotle started, right? When he did his political theories.
I don't know. I remember one of them talking about the ring of invisibility.
That was Plato.
True. But Plato was based.
You start a company on this area, keep the ring in Switzerland until need. Other countries will be convinced to trade with you like any other sovereign country. Government is real estate on a larger scale. Finagle land to minimize revenue needs to attract immigrants. For more customers it attracts and happier they are, the more revenue it generates. Basic economics that you can't make someone happier by reducing actions that they take. Freedom 1, computation and communication. Freedom 2, arbitration. Freedom 3, medicine. Freedom 4, industry. Freedom 5, instruction. Freedom 6, finance. Well, you see, this is really weird, right? Because this entire thought, you see, there's like two contradictory ideas going on in Moldbug's head here. The first one is, like a lot of libertarians or libertarian adjacent people, Switzerland was sort of held up as this idealized example. One, Switzerland is a direct democracy, so how does that work with Moldbug's Schrodinger's democracy? But second of all, Switzerland, well, then it does now probably. For Switzerland to be Switzerland, it can't have unlimited immigration, which Moldbug seems to think that Finagle land would need to do to maximize revenue. Well, then, Switzerland doesn't do that. So that's the first thing. And then furthermore, it assumes that immigrants are fungible. What if immigrants end up being net social service users? What if immigrants end up causing violence like in France and Germany and the UK? And it turns out that they're not actually adding revenue.
Yeah. What I found interesting with the Switzerland comment, which is why I have the little note there, is why would you keep this ring in some other country? And this is going to dovetail really nicely into everything else, right? So you can't have perfect freedom of communication. Why? Because let's suppose some citizen of Finagle land sees that the ring is en route to like the bank in Switzerland or something, right? So it had to be used to do some media thing or whatever. It's en route to the Bank of Switzerland. It's no longer on the premises of Finagle land. They call up the U.S. government. They're like, "Yo, hey, bro, that ring you want? Yeah, it's on its way to Switzerland. Can I get my $10 million, please? Yeah, thanks." Suddenly, the U.S. government, the CIA, intercept the plane or boat or whatever en route to Switzerland. They get the ring. They're now the holders of the ring. And then de facto, they are now the CEO of Finagle land. When all the power that rules Finagle land is captured in a ring, he who holds the ring is the CEO.
Yeah.
And so you can't have freedom of communication there because once you tell people when the ring is vulnerable, then you're in trouble. So what that means is that finagle land is going to have to heavily regulate the communication of its citizens. So nobody knows if and when the ring is vulnerable, which also means they might not know when the ring is vulnerable, which could mean regulating the press and all sorts of other things. Like he just assumes that these freedoms are just going to fall out because finagle land is such a wonderful place and everybody's going to want to trade with it and so on. But human nature, my guy, when the rulership of the country is dictated on who holds the ring of power, so to speak, like people will take money to give up those secrets. And this is one thing Moldbug just doesn't seem to understand. He thinks that like a nuke or like some deterrence from abroad is enough to like keep a country safe. And he thinks that like all these laws like marijuana or speech regulations or whatever are just because, you know, people want to be tyrants. But a lot of times these laws are put into place because in order to have like a, you know, militarily trained group of citizens with the right values and so on, they're always ready for war, defend the country, whatever. There are certain behaviors you have to regulate. There's certain information you can't let get to the enemy. There's like a whole list of things you have to do to maintain the sovereignty he wants a country to have. And so there are non-totalitarian reasons why you'd have restrictions that he thinks, you know, finagle would just never have. So I gave an obvious one. If I took the time to go down the list, I'd get the other ones, but we've got more stuff to talk about. But that's what struck me with this article, going over it again.
Yeah, well, the other thing too is, well, there's two. Okay, this actually ties into our conversation on Wednesday. With regards to people assuming certain things were just incontrovertible truths. Like you say here, basic economics, you can't make someone happier by reducing the actions they take. When in actual fact, that's if you give people too many choices, they become unhappy because they don't know what to choose.
Yep.
But also the idea that government is real estate on a larger scale. I mean, okay, so in the one sense, when you say the government is a corporation, and you say, okay, when governments are incorporated, and in fact, a lot of local governments in the United States will actually have charters of a corporation that, you know, are dated and recorded in some courtroom somewhere. But here's the thing. They're not for-profit corporations because they provide services that are market failures like national defense, policing. So there's some other highest value that they're so yes, Moldbug is technically right in that they are in many cases incorporated, but they don't seek the profit motive as, you know, maximizing shareholder profits. Is there anything you want to say about these freedoms? I don't remember them very well.
Yeah, I already showed why, you know, finagle land cannot have the absolute freedom of communication. The other ones, I mean, if we put our heads together and think about them, we can probably find really good counterexamples where they should be mitigated, else finagle land will be threatened. I don't know that it's worth the time in an hour summary today. I think we might have done so with some of them when we first talked about it in our other video. But, you know, just take my logic for one. Tell the CIA when the ring's in transit and it's vulnerable because it's not on finagle land, it's not in Sweden in the lockbox. Boom, you get paid. Finagle land switches owners. You know, everybody wins but the original CEO of finagle land, and that's going to happen a lot. The same thing could happen with all of them. So, yeah.
Well, the other thing I'll just say before we move to the next article is this human nature element, this what we might call X factor that you say that Moldbug keeps ignoring. This is just a problem with people that are in the tech sector. They think that they think that the computer world is real and reality is just a super more complicated version of the computer world. And these kinds of things don't happen in the computer world because we coded it, right? NPCs and video games don't do these kinds of things unless it was coded that they do so in order to move the story along.
Right.
So it's like, oh, well, it doesn't happen in my simulation that I made for, you know, Windows 95. So it's not going to happen now. Well, that's idiotic, as if the real world is anything like a computer program that you wrote. But yeah. I think that ultimately explains why Moldbug just doesn't see this. Friction in Theory and Practice, 6/19/2007. Friction, not violence, is the combination of conflict and uncertainty. Conflict exists when two people want a scarce resource. Uncertainty exists when it is difficult to predict the outcome of a conflict. Uncertainty isn't the same as probability. Probability can be resolved by expected utility calculations. Friction is rational, so it cannot be eradicated by missionaries. Let's see. Subjective rational preference is the consequence of an intentional act. War is a kind of friction. Politics is a limited kind of war. Libertarians conflate weak and small government. Moldbug wants small, strong, and efficient government. Okay, let's see. Friction, not violence, is the combination of conflict and uncertainty.
He used to say violence was the combination of those two things. He's changing the word to friction to be less emotionally loaded. However, notably, later on when he writes his Why I'm Not a Libertarian essay, he goes right back to describing violence as the combination of those two things again, so it didn't stick.
It didn't stick. I mean, yeah, sure, conflict exists when two people compete over a scarce resource, but that's not the only condition under which conflict could exist. You could be in conflict with someone who has a radically different view of the world that you do.
Mm-hmm.
Think of like religious or ideological conflicts, but
right.
Sure, a lot of conflict does develop that way. Fine. Uncertainty exists when it is difficult to predict the outcome of conflict. Uncertainty isn't the same as probability. Okay, I mean, as far as it goes, I think we can run with it. See, this is the problem. Probability can be resolved through utility calculations. But that's only if the meta state that you're playing the game in for your game theory doesn't change, or doesn't change very much. But of course, we're living in the age of liquid modernity, so good luck with that, Logos.
Yeah, I mean, his argument there is like if two people are having a conflict over a resource, and both agree there's like a 30% chance that A can win it and a 70% chance that B could win it, what they could do is just make some negotiation where A gets 25% and B gets 75% or somewhere thereabout to minimize losses through the conflict and ensure that they get what they probably could have gotten if they fought the thing in the first place. And his commentary about this is basically the world's too muddy to calculate these probabilities or ensure that both people in a conflict are even running under the same probabilities. And so that's probably just not going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, and then I guess the punchline of this whole article is Moldbug wants a small, strong, and efficient government. Again, I guess like a city state or something. That seems to be what his goal is. Is there anything you want to add to this article here?
Yeah. One of the parts I really, really liked in the article is when he talked about rationality. Let me find it again. Let's see. Subjective rational preference is the consequence of any intentional act. So he even points at like say a suicide bomber blows himself up in a Starbucks or something. And he says that guy would be rational if he intended to kill himself while hurting everybody else in colorful Moldbugian language. Well, under this view of rationality, like almost like you could rationally enter into a conflict you're going to lose if the point is purely to hurt the other person, not to take something from them or to profit off of it. So this entire profit motivated view of violence, which is going to carry with him through all the rest of this stuff, just isn't going to work, right? He says that, well, yeah, rational violence is rare. I'm like, well, yeah, but you have this whole new category of rational and not profit motivated violence now that's going to be a giant hole in your theory that you have to deal with.
Which you probably won't.
Not that I've seen.
Why, when, and how to abolish the United States, 7/03/2007. The United States is an organization acting as a legal person, i.e. a corporation. FedCo is two businesses, real estate and security. FedCo can change tax rates to optimize revenue. FedCo should have little insecurity overhead for domestic threats. Pathologies in FedCo's budget have to do with the way it's structured as a corporation. Corporations are controlled by their creditors. Nationalists, democracy believers think FedCo should be a cooperative. Yeah, nationalism is democracy, Logos. Tell that to the 1488 crowd. FedCo has lost its cooperative status and is now controlled by its contractors. Current equity should be distributed to those most likely to bring about the reboot. FedCo cannot pay dividends in its own corporate script. Note the when question is answered in 9/12/2007. Regime change is warranted when the government engages in widespread deception. No, wait, was this the article where he literally ended in the final paragraph by saying that we beat the state by making it more efficient?
I don't remember that one, but it might be.
Well, because remember, there was I almost thought it was this one, but since I didn't read this recently, remember there was an article we were reading, and right at the very end, the final paragraph, Moldbug says, the way we beat the Brahmins in the U.S. government is we help make the government so efficient that I guess all of these complaints go away. Do you remember that? We had a huge...
Yeah, I remember reading that article. I don't remember reading that in any of the ones I read today. It might have been one of the ones I missed because it was more of a side article than one of the big argument ones.
So that's fine. But it was related, though, to the government and efficiency.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Because here's the thing, right? This isn't really abolishing the United States. What he's describing is just a kind of restructuring.
Yeah, he even clarifies in his 912 article that he doesn't want to do full-on revolution or regime change. What he wants is a reboot, where the government basically just has a restructured management and can operate more efficiently.
Yeah. And how does that help the hobbits exactly, Logos?
Well, trust the plan. He'll tell you later.
I'm not sure how this is supposed to help his constituency, given that this is the source of the problem.
Well, it depends on which constituency you are from Moldbug, right? If you're actually a social conservative that doesn't want the government to become Brave New World, wants to regulate abortion and so on, then Moldbug's got nothing for you. If you're a libertarian who wants to abolish taxes, Moldbug's got nothing for you because he thinks taxes are just basically what you pay your primary landlord who owns the property you live on. So any of those two factions just aren't anybody that Moldbug cares about. He wants, unlimited social freedoms, and he thinks the best way to get that is like to get a corporation whose power cannot be domestically challenged under any circumstances, at which point you can just basically have Brave New World because it's got nothing to fear.
Don't you remember that happening in India with the East India Company, Logos? I missed that part of the history books.
Well, you see, the East India Company didn't have full perfect sovereignty. They were always afraid of an Indian uprising. If they had more sovereignty and more power, then this wouldn't have happened.
Right. Against Democracy, 8/16/2007. Demotists are in favor of some kind of democracy. Anti-demotists aren't. A post-demotist society would have to explain 19th century's victories of democracy against totalitarianism. All of the 19th century totalitarian regimes are... Don't you mean 20th, Logos?
I think I just copied it verbatim, but maybe I misread it. Yeah, it would be 20th.
Yeah, okay. Or offshoots of democracy. This is so because quasi-biologically all these systems are related to monarchy. Another name for formalism is Neo-Cameralism. Neo-Cameralist is a state... To a neo-cameralist, a state is a business that owns a country. A state should be managed like any other large business. To a neo-cameralist, totalitarianism is democracy in its full-blown, most malignant form. Totalitarian states are gangster states. Only shareholder control gives the neo-cameralist state incentive to remain small and efficient. While multi-party states are preferable, they can devolve into one-party states. The greatest danger of all is a party-like structure form in civil service departments supposed to be nonpartisan. The polygon is an embryonic one-party state. Political freedom is the freedom to engage in acts whose purpose is indirect satisfaction obtained by influencing government policy. Personal freedom is the freedom to engage in acts which satisfy you personally at the expense of no one else's rights. While democratic societies regularly infringe on personal freedoms, neo-cameralist societies have no incentive to do so. So, okay. Yeah. Now we have Schrodinger's democracy again, because remember, class, when a single ruler rules by decree, that's the same as a process of voting and active participation in politics. Just so we're clear on that, those are the same things.
They have a biological relationship. He gave this weird analogy of gorillas and chimps and all these different apes. They're all biologically related in the class of apes, and so all these things are biologically related to like monarchies.
Oh, well, there you go. There you go.
The goofiest thing. I read that and just busted up laughing.
Okay, this is what's really annoying. It's like that scene from The Princess Bride where the guy's like, you keep on using that word, but I do not think it means what you think it means. Neo-cameralist doesn't mean a business a country run like a business. Neo-Cameralism was a part of the science of government used by the Prussian monarchy in the 18th century. Now, Voltaire once joked that Prussia was an army with a country, but it's certainly not a corporation with a country. And of course, the demands of the security state in Prussia were the demands of the neo-cameralist science of government. They were not, and of course, if you look at like this like libertarian reading of history with like free markets and capitalism and unregulated markets are good. Germany's definitely one of the baddies. Mises is not a friend of Germany because of its regulatory apparatus of the economy. So actual Prussian neo-cameralism would not have allowed for the free reign of market forces that Moldbug is advocating for. It's just, why does he even use that name? It's like, has nothing to do, its actual original use has nothing to do with what he's trying to use it for.
Yeah, well, what I found out in the articles was basically, well, we read in the articles before, was cameralism was the original word for the Prussian thing, and that was to do with the governments being, obsessed with security. And Moldbug is saying, well, that's right. The primary focus of a government should be security, sovereignty, protecting its citizens from inside and outside aggression. And Neo-Cameralism is just Moldbug's belief that you don't do that through a monarchy or any thing that has hereditary risk. Like you can always, inherit it to your kid and they can screw it up or something. You have to have an outside group managing it with a rational incentive that they're, perennially obligated to keep doing, like say a profit motive. The profit motive never dies, and so the thing can never not be profitable, so to speak.
Well,
and
yeah. Well, just real quick, why wouldn't you just form a corporation where its charter says our highest goal is security?
Because he thinks that you can. Well, he used the U.S. government as a current example of why that's bad. You can have the military-industrial complex then run roughshod over your government institutions, and you will just keep making military stuff until your country just massively gets into debt and becomes insolvent.
Though that's exactly what happened with the East India Company. So what's the difference?
Well, the East India Company just didn't have enough sovereignty.
It wasn't really neo-cameralism. Neo-cameralism's never been tried.
Yeah.
Real neo-cameralism has never been tried, kids. You know what I love, Logos? How like modern political theorists have this fetish for ideologies that have never been tried. Can we have something that has been tried and works, please?
Well, obviously, if modern political theorists thought that something else worked, they just advocate for the thing they thought that worked. But they want to be both novel and they want to fix all the problems of history that they see, and so they're gonna have to make something new that hasn't been tried that's already a byproduct of history.
Yeah, I know.
It's a perennial curse.
Let's see. Okay, only shareholder control gives the neo-cameral state an incentive to remain small and efficient. Well, why? Like corporations who actually do in the real world run with shareholder control seek to get as big as possible. What is he talking about?
Yeah, they do get exceptionally huge, a lot of these businesses. But I think there's something interesting here where, and this is the thing. This is actually the thing, and this is something I was thinking about when reading regular articles or his later articles. Is businesses have a desire to expand. They always want to keep making their market base bigger so they can get more profits from more people. Well, if your land is finite, how are you gonna expand? Well, you're gonna have to take over somebody else's corporation at some other point because you have the constant profit motive to always do so.
Yep.
So if governments have this profit motive that he wants, it's difficult to see how they're not going to expand in much the same ways that other corporations are going to expand, going after everybody else's market bases. Except he thinks that there's just this perfect world where you can just stop all the turrets, give everybody nukes, it'll stop all the turrets. Like, I don't know about that.
Well, don't worry, Logos. Don't worry. It can't happen because the security forces have these biometric locked assault weapons. So there you go.
Well, that's only within the corporation to stop domestic rebellions. At this point, I'm more worried about like inter-corporation conflict rather than
Yeah. No, Logos, you don't understand. That won't happen because it's going to be far profitable to find a peaceful solution. Duh.
Yeah, absolutely. We're gonna increase our profits by just staying with the same market in perpetuity and never expanding it.
Well, what's so ridiculous, right, is both Moldbug's Neo-Cameralism and libertarian PDAs were all tried in India and in the Indies, where the Dutch, the British, and the French all had private companies fighting wars with each other and other indigenous kingdoms for power. Like, we know how these things work.
Yep.
Okay, why I'm not a libertarian? 2007. Libertarianism is basically the ideology of the American Revolution. All revolutions are criminal outrage led by mobs. The colonists in the American Revolution were motivated by conspiracy theories. Via you cannot universalize ethical principles except via historical tradition. Therefore, libertarians are fundamentally conservatives. Conservatives have a problem if whether they do or do not disavow the revolution. This leads to an unsolvable problem of foundations. The problem manifests since the population no longer holds these ideas any longer. The government is not reformable, but libertarianism spends vast amounts of money trying for nothing. Limited government is not a desirable engineering principle. Because all schools of libertarianism rest on this idea of limited government, they're utterly feckless. Moral questions are moot. Violence is caused by tension and ambiguity. Governments exist to eliminate ambiguity. The rest is a rehash of above articles. Yeah, I mean, we don't need to rehash the idea that Moldbug takes this really weird, esoteric, arcane reading of a Tory of the American Revolution and saying that everything the founding fathers believed was a conspiracy theory. I mean, that's just not how you do something like that. That's just trivially bad. But I think there is one area in which Moldbug kind of has a point here, and that is, if you sort of take the principles at the founding of this country for evolution, then you kind of can't stop it. You can't be like, okay, we're going to stop here, guys. We're done. No, you can't go any further because you've already committed to a basic principle that has a ratchet effect.
Yep. That's true.
And so that's what we've seen. Now, let's see. The other thing is, right, the government is not reformable. But that's exactly what Moldbug is advocating. I mean, restructuring the government in the earlier article, Why, When, and How to Abolish the United States, is basically reforming it. Because you're not getting rid of it.
Not quite. He wants to can everybody, basically pay everybody off according to how much they own the government currently. They take all members of the Polygon, the press, the NGOs, the military-industrial complex, pay them off in gold or whatever it takes, get them out, and then basically rebuild the government under a new management structure. So you wouldn't do like a revolution, violently overthrow everything. It'd be kind of like a revolving door where some people come out and some people move in, and you just like restructure the management.
How is that different than a reform? Or a reform project?
Well, a reform project would be like, okay, let's suppose you have a company like, I don't know, Sears. Now, a reform project for Sears would be, hey, Sears is struggling. Let's go in, hire some consultants, figure out how Sears can fix what it needs to fix to keep up with like online shopping, the tech age or whatever, and stay solvent. Well, Sears wasn't able to do that. They weren't able to reform and correct course. So what has to happen? They get blown out by all the other retailers like Amazon and whatever in the online market. Somebody else has to rebuy all their assets. And now somebody's basically building a new corporation entirely on the carcass of Sears assets is kind of what's going on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What anything you want to say about why I'm not a libertarian?
Let's see.
There's a lot here.
Well, the biggest takeaway I get from this is Moldbug's. So Moldbug and libertarians both want a socially libertarian society. So he is a libertarian in that very narrow regard. He wants to be able to smoke pot, and
He's a cultural libertarian.
He's a cultural libertarian, right? The biggest thing is that he's right about. I think he's actually right about this. We've talked about this when we talked about like Hoppe and the NAP and all this other moral stuff libertarians do. The libertarians have a moral dimension to them that he disapproves of, basically. He's like, you can't. What one salient thing he said in the article somewhere was like, you can't have this moral ethical principle about who ought to own what. Maybe it was a different article. It was one of these articles. Because once you have that principle, there's no unraveling it, right? Why is it that you morally deserve this property? You homestead this property. Well, was there anybody that owned it before you? Well, Native Americans or somebody used it. Okay, what happened to those people? Well, they got violently killed or something. Well, okay, so technically you only have this property homesteaded because somebody else broke the nap indirectly on your behalf, right? So now you have this moral principle challenging all this property. So Moldbug's just like, I'm not going to say anybody ought to own anything. I'm going to wash my hands of all of it, let the chips fall where they are, and say what matters is making sure that everybody can secure their stuff, so nobody has, a rational and a profit motive incentive to take everybody's stuff. And that's basically a good enough world for Moldbug, but it's not a good enough world for the libertarians. And that's basically their biggest point of disagreement.
Real quick, we just got a really interesting comment from the chat I want to share. Record deepness. So a Moldbug revolution would be more like a glorious revolution, the one that deposed the formalist stewards that he likes so much. Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of would.
Because right, the glorious revolution was basically where the financial interests in England, well, I guess you could say the rising bourgeoisie wanted a monarchy that they could control, and so they brought in William of Orange, who was a Dutch nobleman, and then deposed James II. So
exactly, yep.
Yeah, it's I don't know.
So the monarchy is still intact. You haven't completely uprooted the system. You've just kind of like revolved out management, so to speak, which is kind of what Moldbug's looking for. Yeah.
For a more detailed read, Neo-Cameralism and the Escalator of Masarchy, 12/20/2007. So, wasn't there an essay that dealt with patchwork?
That dealt with patchwork? Yeah, that was the last essay. He dealt with patchwork kind of like in that big. I was when we talked before the stream. You're like, hey, you got like some notes to do or whatever. I'm like, I'm halfway through this last paper. That was the last paper, but I would have had like 80 bullet points or something ridiculous. Moldbug was on point for that paper. For so many of his papers, there's like 4 or 5 paragraphs straight where he's just like soliloquizing and going on some like rant about some unrelated nonsense. But like you have to put these in bullet point form to summarize so they're readable. That one, he was sailing. He was like a machine. He was just like definition, definition, definition. Here's why this is important. Argument, new topic, definition. Like the whole thing. I was just like every paragraph. It's like, dude, they can read this one for themselves. They don't even need a summary. Like I'm just going to re-summarize the whole paper. It was just taking too long. But yeah, he goes over patchwork and stuff a lot in that one. So the idea is every patch of land is owned by what he calls a sovkor. A sovkor is an entity with the power to prevent aggression on that property by making it sufficiently unprofitable for people to attempt it. This is why I say a big hole in this theory would be rational aggression, not for profit motive. Maybe Sovkor A's football team beat Sovkor B's team in a football game, and so a bunch of people from Sovkor B just want to commit acts of terrorism on Sovkor A or something. Like
Well, especially if losing the football game is somehow tied to national legitimacy.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you lose that game, you didn't just lose a football game. You ended up losing the entire legitimacy of your regime.
Something like that, yeah. And so like there's no profit-seeking motive for the attack to happen. It just happens. But either way, he talked about like there's no rational reason for violence in this world where everybody can prevent attacks. It's like, well, listen, you just told me a few essays back that like suicide bombers could be rational. So I mean, he clarified, well, okay, there's no profit-seeking rational motive. It's like, yeah, but what about all the non-profit seeking ones? Now, in his defense, I mean, in a world where non-profit seeking people can attack you, I mean, you're in such a crazy town. It's like, who can prepare for all of that? But it does, I think, have some interesting commentary on things like immigration, especially with like cultural assimilation and things like that, because people might immigrate to a society, might not like this or that cultural artifact of that society, and do rational but self-harming things that aren't profit driven to change society. And I think a political system that can deal with that is better than what that can't, obviously. So that's something I noticed from that one. But yeah, that's the one where he starts with this patchwork principle of like 10,000 different like sovkors, and they trade on each other's stock exchanges. They have like these cryptographic like keys that control the weapons and all this stuff, like this really in detailed story. I just couldn't bullet point all of it, but if you want to see like how Moldbug's government kind of like runs day to day and like how it prevents foreign domestic threats and so on, like that's definitely the paper. It just doesn't need summarizing for me because it's so dense and on point the whole time. It's pointless. Yeah.
Sure. No, that makes sense. So I guess briefly, and the time that we have left, we can sort of just summarize the broad theory about Moldbug that we've been developing, especially after reading not only the 2007, but his appearance on Orrin McIntyre and some of the stuff from the Gray Mirror that we were recommended to read as well. One, I don't know if this continues, but as of 2007, I think it's pretty clear he was a Stirnerite, right? He said, I want to reduce violence, but like literally everything that he advocates would lead to increasing violence.
Well, there's a couple questions that I have about reading his stuff that are kind of unavoidable, even if you get rid of the moral element that kind of make the Stirnerite thing true. If you assume Moldbug's world is already built, so you already have these corporations, they all have nukes pointed at each other, that don't try anything stupid, whatever. Sure, I can kind of see how that would, reduce violence. The issue is that all these corporations need some shareholders. They right. This is the key. They need investors to buy these corporations, basically, to get these profits and so on. Who is going to be the shareholders? What resource are they going to use to buy the corporations? Because you already said you can't, you can't pay out and take money in like corporate script. That just doesn't make any sense. So what's the resource going to be? How are they going to get it without using violence, right? So even if neocameralism is like the goal, I'm thinking of like some Mad Max society where people are like, okay, gold's going to be the resource. We pay all the shareholders in. There's this Mad Max dash for gold, mass friction. Everybody wants this gold so they can start their own, be shareholders for their own softcores. And you get like tons and tons of violence. So even if out the other end of it, you get like this utopian, like patchwork society full of nukes. To get from here to there on the interim just sounds like an absolute bloodbath, especially if we're going to be like amoral about like how all this is done.
Yeah, which also, his statements about morality not being real would line up with the sort of anti-moralism of Stirner. A more anti-moral realism, rather, right? So he's a moral anti-realist, which again lines up with Stirner.
Yep.
So I think in a lot of ways, Moldbug is a Stirnerite. That's him and his personal beliefs. At least that's what seems to be coming through to me.
Yeah.
But then the other thing is, okay, but what is his broader like objective? Because he talks, we read the Dark Elves and the Hobbits and all that nonsense and the infiltration and the waiting. And we pointed out that, everything he said on Orrin McIntyre, he said in 2007. So one, nobody should be surprised. But two, it didn't work, right? Clearly it's not working. There's no so subtle infiltration of like wooing the Brahmins. I mean, first of all, when has that ever worked in history? That's just stupid. It doesn't work. Being a consultant like that. It didn't work for Machiavelli. He said he wrote The Prince for Lorenzo de' Medici. Didn't get him a job there. And so, but then we got to the conclusion, well, who is he actually infiltrating? Because he says a lot of nice things about Brahmins in 2007. He says, I am a Brahmin. I don't want to live with hobbits. And it's like, maybe he's actually infiltrating the right.
Yeah, when he said, when I read over that and found the bullet point where he said, I would not want to live in the country if these people won. Like, that's it. Put a bow on it. We know exactly what's going on here.
Yeah. And so he uses a lot of colorful language and colorful imagery taken from history's losers, the sort of like royal houses of Europe in order to have like this right-wingish veneer.
Yes.
That's the veneer. The veneer was what drew all these people in, and that's where this whole reactionary explosion online came from.
Right.
It's from Moldbug. But the actual substance isn't reactionary at all.
No.
And yeah. So he's kind of a Joker figure, right? Like Stirner, just causing mayhem for the sake of causing mayhem. But he also seems to be working for... Well, he also was bragging about the fact that he had family connections to the CFR.
Right.
Well, I'm sure that has no bearing whatsoever on anything.
Well, he's just rebelling against that part of his family. I'm sure they'd be so mad if they saw what he was writing online.
Oh, they'd be so mad. I know. It'd be
They'd be so mad about his prospects
because
to
you
do nothing.
remember what he said in another article. He said that real news is happening when was the New York Times and the CFR both in agreement
Yes.
or something. And I'm like, okay, so clue everybody, Rubes, CFR is important when it shows up. Something real is happening. Well, he's making connections, to his family with the CFR.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we had the article from 2020 with Brian Doherty. Wait, wasn't Peter Thiel a libertarian? Where there seems to be Thiel bucks involved. So I think we have a pretty good idea from 2007's UR and some of the other stuff that we've engaged of understanding Moldbug's true MO.
I agree.
And I hope that everybody, these 3 episodes of slightly less than 3 hours, will help summarize you on what we did in 80 hours. So
yeah, I mean, we can pad this a little bit by just summarizing the summary, right? So episode 1 was basically what is formalism, what is Moldbug not like democracy, his mimetic idea of what he'll later call separation of information and state. I didn't go over that article in this one, but that's where it'll culminate into the idea that education, media, other systems can act just like the churches and everything the government, people are afraid of, but because of their relation to the state, we have problems. We get his discussion of the caste system. We get his chimp analogy, right? He has the chimp analogy for formalism with the young chimps and the old chimps, which is why I always bring up Schrodinger's chimp, especially when talking about, non-profit driven, not, rational violence. There might not be any profit in a young chimp getting beat up by an older chimp trying to, assert dominance, but he's going to try it anyway because why not? So Schrodinger's chimp comes from the first part. All the memes about calling everything universalism and Calvinism that we talk about, we'll talk about next year as well, came from your second part that you did last week. And this week we had memes talking about Finagle. So anytime we bring up the Ring of Finagle and make a joke about the Ring of Finagle, that came from this one. The Ring of Finagle, again, was the analogy for the absolute power of the state instead of Officer Peaceful, military people being hired by the state to defend stuff. They just have absolute power, absolute sovereignty. How do warlord behave in this instance? Moldbug thinks to be very, very different. Hence our joke about the East India Company. If only the East India Company had more sovereignty, it would have been less, crazy and dictatorial to the Indians. Was there any other good memes in this part? No, this part was kind of dry, I think, compared to the first one. The first one had all the memes.
Yeah, the first 2 had all the memes.
They did.
Yeah.
So we had Finagle. Finagle's a pretty good one. We'll take it.
We did do Finagle.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, hey guys, why do real political science? Just invoke some science fiction thought experiment. Because why not?
Why not?
Why not? All right, guys, this is Todd Lewis of the Prayers of Fire podcast signing off.